I want to thank everyone for assembling for one last discussion and presentation as we conclude what has been a very successful weekend. I think it's been really awesome that we've been able to do this. There's going to be a lot of great presentations that are going to go up online. A lot of relationships between members of our organization have been solidified. We've gotten to know each other. This is very, very successful. But a lot of things have happened while we've been here in Linn Valley, Kansas. And so I can't really end this retreat without making some comments on that and kind of opening up for discussion of that. So I guess I want to start out by saying that there's a writer named Sherwood Anderson. I don't know if people have ever heard of Sherwood Anderson. He was a famous writer during the 1930s. He wrote a novel called Winesburg, Ohio, which was a kind of populist, quaint novel, realism about a small town. But Winesburg, Ohio was quoted as being asked, what's the difference between a socialist and a communist? And he said he did not know the technical difference, but it seemed like the communists are the ones who mean it. That's what he said the difference was. And what he's pointing toward is a level of political seriousness that has kind of defined communists, Marxist, Leninists, socialists, revolutionary anti-imperialists. And a lot of times people don't understand that seriousness. If you read some of the critical histories of the Communist Party, Trotsky alludes to this, but so do just straight up anti-communists. They talk about the zigging and the zagging, right? They have a song, Our Line's Gonna Change Again, right? And they talk about how during the early 1930s, the Communist Party took the position that Social Democrats were the main enemy. They were the main roadblock, and opposing the Social Democrats was the main focus. But then, after Hitler came to power, and as they were leading up to the Second World War, they switched their position, and they started building an alliance with Social Democrats, because that was what was needed in order to defeat fascism and setting the stage for the Second World War. And people looked at this, and they said they're inconsistent. But what they were is they were serious. They understood what we've kind of become a mantra of CPI. Over the weekend, we've said it so many times that if the situation changes in 24 hours, the tactics must also change in 24 hours. But they also understood that you can't do tactics lightly. You can't half-ass it. If they had just half-assed calling out and exposing the Social Democrats, it wouldn't have worked. If they just half-assed building a popular front with the Social Democrats, it wouldn't have worked. And the communists are the ones who mean it. And while their tactics change, they always take with it a level of very serious, intentional, motivated effort, right? They're serious about getting things done. They want to achieve their aim, and because of that, they take a level of seriousness. And there's some communists from Iran that I think are almost like the shining example of this, because after the Islamic Revolution of Iran in 1979, there were very big communist parties in Iran. You had the Tudeh Party, which was the big communist party. Then you had the Mujahideen, which was the Islamic socialist group, and then you also had the Fedayeen, the People's Fedayeen guerrillas. And because Iraq invaded Iran, there was heavy political repression of communists in the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution. But there are many Iranian communists I know who had relatives who were killed, who went to prison, some of whom were tortured, that in more recent years, 2006, starting from about 2006, have come to the conclusion that the Islamic Republic is moving in a revolutionary, anti-capitalist, and anti-imperialist direction. And even though they have this horrendous trauma of members of their family being killed and of themselves being tortured, they understand this. And they see the relationship between Venezuela and the Bolivarian countries in Iran, and they see what's going on with Russia and China. And based on this level of political seriousness, they're able to actually align with the government that heavily repressed them in the early 80s. And that's what is being alluded to in the statement made by Sherwood Anderson, that we're the ones who mean it, that we are capable of doing very politically difficult things and saying things that are not easy to say, and doing things that we would not naturally do because we are one to a political line that it's what needs to be done. And that is the approach that we need to take toward the recent Supreme Court ruling around Roe versus Wade, because there's nothing easier, especially in leftist and socialist circles, than going along with the prevailing narrative. If you were out in the streets right now saying, burn it down, civil war, that's the easiest thing in the world. And it's very easy to go along with the crowd. And it's very easy to just echo what CNN and MSNBC are saying. It's very easy to do that. But our job is not to do what's easy. Our job is to do what needs to be done to carry out our aim. And we know that our ultimate aim of setting up an America where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few, where the people of the United States are seeing their living standards rise in alliance with the Eurasian countries, Russia and China and Venezuela, etc., that carrying out that aim is something that the liberals don't intend to do. And what the liberals want to do and what we want to do are completely opposite. And while we may agree on certain issues, while we may favor labor unions, we may oppose racism, we're not the liberals. And while we may agree on some things, we don't agree on all things. And we have a separate aim. And because of that, we have to sometimes do different than what the liberals do. And so that's how we have to approach this recent Supreme Court ruling. And I want to point out that there is diversity of opinion in the Center for Political Innovation, but I would say the overwhelming majority of our organization are pro-choice. I personally am pro-choice. You know, there are some exceptions in our organization, but the overwhelming majority of our organization are pro-choice. And I'll tell you why I personally am pro-choice. I personally am pro-choice because of the fact that we do not have a religious government in the United States. That, you know, at the time the United States was founded, there were 13 colonies, and 9 of them had state religions. There were 9 of the 13 colonies that had official state religions. And the reason that the Bill of Rights, Amendment number 1 of the Constitution of the United States says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, was because the only way those states that had state religions would join was if they understood that their state religion wouldn't be suppressed, right? Maryland was a Catholic state. Massachusetts was a Puritan state. Quakers were running Pennsylvania. That's why it's Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods, after William Penn, the Quaker. And there was a fear on the part of many of these states that if they joined the United States, that a religious group that had more support would take control of the government and impose their state religion on minority religions. And the United States, as people were coming into it from around the world, was a place that people with divergent religious views could go. And so in order to preserve that safety for people of minority religious views, there was a feeling at the time the United States was founded that it must be a country where the government has no establishment of religion, where the government is neutral on religious matters. The government is not saying there is no God. The government is not saying there is a God. The government's not Christian. It's not Muslim. It's not atheist. It's neutral on religious matters. And whether or not a fetus constitutes a life, a human life that the government is obligated to defend, in my view, is a religious question. It is not one that you can prove in a court of law. It's not one that you can argue. And because it is ambiguous, and because different religious views and different philosophical systems feel that way, for the government at the local, state, or federal level to take a position and outlaw abortion would not be consistent with the law of the United States and with a principle that I think comes out of the founding of the United States. It's good. We don't want to celebrate everything about the United States. The Constitution also says black people are 3/5 of a human being. The Constitution's not great in a lot of ways, but one principle, this principle of no established religion, I think is a good one. And so that's why I personally take a pro-choice position. And I'm not happy to see that Roe versus Wade has been overturned. And I know the result of that is in many states that have trigger laws, abortion has been outlawed. And I'm not happy about this. And I understand that this is a moment where there's a huge amount of outrage going on. There's many people that fear and they talk about the safety of women. You know, women who want to get abortions, may not be able to do so in a legal, regulated, safe manner. And there's fear about, when women try to give themselves abortions. We see protesters out there with bloody hangers, and there's a lot of fear and anger in the population right now. Well, that said, there are people that are part of our community that their religious belief, whether they are Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu, they have the opposite perspective. And they're welcome to be part of the Center for Political Innovation. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But the first point I want to make, and this is a point that I think that we just need to get everyone to understand. If the American people could understand this aspect of the debate around Roe versus Wade, things in the United States could really change. Why was Roe versus Wade overturned? It was overturned because the right wing fought for it. That's why. If you didn't notice, there was this event called January 6th where people stormed the Capitol. If you didn't notice, there are huge evangelical churches across this country that have deep roots in communities. If you didn't notice, there are all kinds of people who've given their efforts, their lives, their time to try and overturn Roe versus Wade. And through their activism, and through their confrontation with the power structure, and more recently, they weren't just saying vote red no matter who, they were actively going out and confronting this. And through their activism, through their organizing, through their deep roots in the community, and through their real threats to the powers that be, they got what they wanted. And that should be solid proof that if the Democrats really wanted Medicare for all, they could do it.
Yeah. Yes.
If the Democrats were willing to fight for Medicare for all, for union rights, the same way the right wing has fought against abortion, we would have it right now. We would have the Employee Free Choice Act, we'd have union card check, we'd have Medicare for all, we'd have free college for all. The reason that the Democrats are not fighting for these things they claim to believe in is because, unlike the right wing that really does, for their own reasons, believe that abortion should be overturned, the Democrats don't believe in these things. The Democrats give lip service to these things, but they don't really believe in them. And that this is something we need to make very, very clear. That also, you'll notice that it wasn't during the era of neoconservatives that Roe versus Wade was overturned. It was overturned in the era of Trump and populism. And that's when the Democratic Party was in power, but the Republican Party stopped being the party of just vote for us and the status quo. But when the Republican Party started flirting with populism and flirting with radicalism and pumping up their base in an anti-establishment way and actually becoming a threat to the power structure, that's when the power structure was forced to give them what they want. And this needs to be acknowledged. And this is something we can tell our coworkers and our friends, and that they could understand. That the way they got what they wanted was by becoming a threat to the power structure, making real demands. And I actually predicted this. It's not a great moment to go, I told you so, but 3 or 4 years ago I predicted that Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned. And I said why. The reason that I said Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned was because this is a victory that can be given to the Trump base, to middle America, without ultimately changing the structure of the United States, right? They're not going to end the wars for these folks. They're not going to implement a totally free market libertarian economy and let things completely crash. But this is something that they can give to red states, to Alabama, to Kentucky, to Tennessee, to conservative states. This is something they can give them that doesn't ultimately change the structure of the United States, but will make the folks that are feeling alienated, that are feeling angry, that are joining anti-government movements like QAnon, make them feel like they've been heard. Make them feel like they've been heard. And my feeling, my prediction is that these laws that are on the books now that say you can't travel from state to get an abortion will not stand. My feeling is that they will allow people to go to New York or go to Illinois or go to California to get abortions, and they won't be able to prosecute people coming back. I don't think that there's any grounds for them to be prosecuting people for getting abortions in other states. And on top of that, it's important to point out that there will be a huge amount of effort on the part of Planned Parenthood and other foundations to enable women in those states to travel to other states to get abortions. And this is something that we do point out, right? I am for abortion because I believe in women's rights, and I believe that the government does not have the right to step in and make a religious call like that. But Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger and a lot of the ultra-rich, they believe in abortion for very, very different reasons. I recall, at one point in my youth, I was sitting in the living room. I can't get into the specifics of why I was there. I was sitting in the living room of one of the main funders of the Republican Party of Ohio. And they were also one of the main contributors to Planned Parenthood of Ohio. And their reason for it was they felt that poor people have too many children, there's too many people in the world, eco-Malthusian reasons. It wasn't because these were not feminists and radicals that were fighting for the rights of women. These were people who very much feel there are too many people in the world. And that, while there is, we both, those of us who are pro-choice, we do want women's rights to be protected, we should acknowledge that there are other forces that want abortion for different reasons, for very different reasons. But that said, those of us who are pro-choice, we now have the very, very difficult job of trying to explain to our pro-choice friends and our pro-choice coworkers and our pro-choice Marxists and socialists why joining this liberal mobilization right now and screaming about civil war is not going to help. And that's going to be a very difficult thing to say because people are going to be very emotional about this right now. And on top of that, the media is not trying to calm people down. The media is hyping all of this up. And it's going to be very difficult to do. And we should be careful about it. I urge people to be careful. Don't poo-poo, the things that people say. If someone says they're really triggered and they're upset about it, don't say, oh, it's not a big deal. Don't say anything that would sound like you're insensitive to what they're saying. But with the more advanced elements, talk about what's going on not in the Supreme Court, but in the country itself, about what's basically happening to the United States right now. Rosa Luxemburg, who is one of the most important Marxist revolutionaries of the early 20th century, she wrote a very important pamphlet at the beginning of World War I called the Junius Pamphlet. And she didn't sign it because she wrote it, and she eventually went to prison for writing it, but she didn't sign it because she didn't want to go to jail. And so she wrote it as Junius. That's why it was called the Junius Pamphlet. And it was a socialist pamphlet arguing against World War I. The German Social Democratic Party had said it would never support a war, and then they zigzagged and they ended up supporting the war anyway. But in the Junius Pamphlet, she said something that I think is very important. I'm going to just read to you this paragraph that she wrote in the beginning of the Junius Pamphlet when she was calling out the Social Democrats for supporting the war. She said, "Today we face the choice exactly as Frederick Engels foresaw it a generation ago. Either the triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization, as in ancient Rome, depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery, or the victory of socialism, and that means the conscious, active struggle of the international proletariat against imperialism and its methods of war." And this points to an ugly hidden truth. We try to be optimistic here. We always try to be very optimistic about everything. We want to make it sound like, we will win, and I believe we will win. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. But historical inevitability is not something that we completely cling to these days. The Roman Empire was abominable and horrendous, but when it fell, it did not become replaced with something better. The fall of the Roman Empire did not result in a higher plane. It resulted in something worse. The life expectancy of human beings significantly decreased in Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. The height of human beings decreased by inches, I believe, after the fall of the Roman Empire. And from what I understand, it took Europe 1,100 years to get back to the population level it had had at the height of the fall of the Roman Empire, at the height of the Roman Empire after the fall, 1,100 years. And it's quite interesting because at the time the United States was being founded, one of the most popular books was Edward Gibbon's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. As the founders of the United States were setting up the United States, they were studying this work of history that was so important. They were studying it page by page, trying to figure out how can we do something different. And that was around the time that Europe was starting to reach the population levels it had at the height of the Roman Empire. That's why so many towns in upstate New York have Roman or Greek names. That's why if you look at the capital, that's why they have the columns that look like Greece and Rome in the capital. It was because they were studying what went wrong. What went wrong with the Roman Empire? Why did the Roman Empire fall? And as we're starting to build a new civilization and we're starting to study reason and we're questioning the old feudal order, how can we not make the mistakes the Roman Empire made? And so it's important to understand that. But when the Roman Empire fell, it wasn't replaced by something better. We like Spartacus. We showed a clip from Spartacus earlier here. Spartacus leading the slaves of Rome to revolt was a great thing. And we like the Zealots and the Jews that fought for their independence against the Romans. And we like the various heroic movements of people in Africa and the Germans and others who fought for their independence. But the Roman Empire falling by itself did not necessarily lead to something better. And that imperialism is on a trajectory that could lead to something worse coming to replace it unless something better emerges. And that leads me to, I just recently started studying a very important book called, I believe it's called The Assault on Reason by Lukács, who was a Marxist philosopher. And he talked about the rise of philosophical irrationalism. So if you go back to the time, it was the Spanish who got in on colonialism first. The Spanish were the colonizers, Christopher Columbus. And as they were going into Cuba and Mexico and South America and colonizing people, Spain still largely had a feudal economy at the time. And as they were colonizing and committing horrendous crimes, rape and murder and plunder, they also brought the clergy with them. And there were many cases of clergymen among the Spanish colonizers speaking up and saying this is wrong. It's very interesting. Clergymen getting up and saying the way we're treating the indigenous people, this is wrong. The way we're plundering them, the way we're forcibly converting them, this is not right. And this was a bit of a problem for Spanish colonialism. And to some degree or other, this kind of restrained the ability of Spain to function as a colonizer. And we know that feudalism is a horrendous system, right? Feudalism is a very horrendous system where, it's full of violations of rights, etc. But in feudalism, there are very, very rigid, clear rules. There are very, very rigid, clear rules in feudalism. And they're not fair rules, and they're not justified. They're hypocritical rules, etc. But feudalism is held together by a very clear, rigid moral code. And what Friedrich Nietzsche and others started noticing was with the rise of not just colonialism, but especially imperialism, that Western civilization was shedding any notion of a moral code. Friedrich Nietzsche gives voice to this notion of might is right. He attacks Christianity because he says Christianity is the cry of the weak against the strong. He attacks socialism, saying socialism is nothing but Christianity because it says people should be kind to one another. It says the last shall be first and the first shall be last. He's attacking Christianity not because he thinks it's irrational and not scientific, but because he sees it putting forward a message that ultimately would challenge imperialism. And he celebrates what he calls the blonde beast, the white man who goes to Africa or Asia and sheds his moral Christian pretenses and goes back to a morality of might makes right. This is philosophical irrationalism, right? The belief that the strong should just ruthlessly rule over the weak. The belief that right and wrong are something made up to restrain the powerful. They're a con or a hustle. And this philosophical irrationalism that you can talk about Friedrich Nietzsche, and now I think Ayn Rand is definitely an expression of it, this is really the ideology of the ruling class of the United States. But it's not for everybody, right? I mean, they don't give it to everybody. But, it's not a coincidence that many Republicans, but also Stacey Abrams, say that Atlas Shrugged is their favorite book. It's not a coincidence at all. It's not a coincidence. And what Leo Strauss, the ideologue of the neocons, put forward was also a similar view, right? That morality, these things are a dangerous threat to the philosopher kings, the smart people who are meant to rule over the rest of us, and that any form of populism that would be kind of an effort, a mobilization of society to enforce some kind of moral code on the elites was a threat to freedom for the intellectuals, a threat to science, etc. That's what you get when you read the Philosophers and the Art of Writing by Leo Strauss. And that's what Leo Strauss taught his students, who eventually became the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party. And this is what the elites believe. And that's why ContraPoints in her video on envy, right, when she started talking about Christianity, she could have read Karl Kautsky and talked about Karl Kautsky's understanding of Christianity as the expression of the Roman proletariat. But she didn't. Instead, she focused on going over Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil and highlighting this kind of worldview. It's a very anti-socialist worldview, and it's a worldview that has nothing to do with that, but yet this prominent bread tuber decided to just preach philosophical irrationalism at her audience because that's what they believe. And it's a matter of emphasis. The left focuses on social liberalism, the idea that you have no obligation to your community, you have no obligation to your family, you have no obligation to your country, live your life as you want, social liberalism, the individual's rights above all else. The right wing focuses on economic liberalism, right? The government has no right to tax people, the government has no right to regulate corporations. Corporations should be able to do whatever they want and get the government off our backs. But this is really what they believe. It's liberalism justified with philosophical irrationalism. Individualism above all else. Collectivism is always dangerous. Collectivism is always fascist. That's what they believe. And this ideology is an ideology that leads to civilizations coming apart. Civilizations are held together by moral codes and beliefs and ideologies. That's why ideologies have always existed throughout human history. Wherever human beings have been existing, they've built moral codes to live by. They've written religions and ideologies, etc. This is what human beings need. I've often made the analogy that ideology is like when you're driving down the road. You know where you came from, you know where you're going, you know how you're getting there. But when you strip society of ideology, and you say it's all just a matter of the weak versus the strong, and there is no real truth, that leads to a situation where, imagine you were driving down the road, and suddenly you didn't know where you were coming from, and you didn't know where you were going, you didn't know how you were getting there. You'd stop the car. Suddenly, you'd be, what am I doing? And that's what's happening all across the United States, because the roadmap that we were given to define U.S. society is coming apart. And It's coming apart, and it's not being replaced with a new roadmap. We have an ideology. It's called Marxism-Leninism. We know where we came from, and we know where we're going. Actually, one of the songs of the Chinese Revolution, the Lei Fang song, if you look at the lyrics, it translates to know where you came from and know where you are going. And that's one of the things. And in China, they have ideology. Every Chinese student is given a red scarf on their first day of school and told that that's their little piece of the Chinese flag. And the red stands for the blood of all the people who have fought to make China what it is today. And they are imbued with ideology. And it's that ideology that enables people to keep living, and enables people to keep believing, and enables people to go on and make sacrifices and be happy and optimistic about the next day. And as the ruling class is seeing its own ideology spread among U.S. society is coming apart. And part of that coming apart is the red states versus blue states divide. Right? And we're going to increasingly see, I believe, an effort by the global financial capitalists to break apart the United States, to balkanize the United States. They always accuse Russia and China of trying to balkanize the United States. They're the ones trying to balkanize the United States. Because if this country were solid, and if the working people of this country loved each other and identified with each other and had some kind of national unity, they could block the austerity that they want to impose. They want to atomize the United States, to break it up into many different little communities, many different states that they can all conquer. When people are divided, they are weaker. When they're together, they're stronger. And so playing up this red state versus blue state divide and intensifying that is a way to push forward their agenda of austerity, of making every state poorer. Right? They see the United States, I've said this many times, the Atlanticists see the United States as New York City and Southern California, and a big gap between there. But our job is to see the United States instead as a country with 50 states in it, full of natural resources, full of people that want to go out and work, full of communities that are full of great potential. That's what our job to see the United States is. And that's why Stalin advised the Communist Party and William Z. Foster to move the headquarters of the Communist Party from New York City to Chicago, because they understood that if things are going to change in the United States, it's not going to happen on the port on the one side or the port on the other. It's going to happen in the middle of the country. And so we have to communicate, and these are not simple ideas. These are complex ideas. We have to communicate to other people that in order to really push things forward, we need to be trying to bring red states and blue states together around an economic agenda that can make life better for all Americans. And that means getting Americans in red states and blue states to see what they have in common. It also means pushing back against free market ideas. It also means, means not buying into the demonization. And so if we go out and I understand, I think there was some were there explosions? There was some violence that happened yesterday. I know this morning there was some people stripping naked in some churches and screaming. And these are things that are ultimately, at the end of the day, feeding the agenda. This is feeding the agenda, and we have to be the ones to do the difficult thing because we're serious and tell people that feeding into this divide, as angry as we might be about it, feeding into this divide is not going to help bring the United States closer to socialism, and it's going to embolden our enemies. And that's going to be a difficult task to do, but it's what we have to do. And it's going to be hard. And I would urge you to not throw your pearls before swine. Don't waste your time arguing with people that will never be convinced. Talk to the people that you think are more serious. That's my advice. That's my advice. And I just want to talk about how crazy these folks are. Now, Gavin, you're a beloved member of our organization. Stand up, please. This is Gavin Lockhart. You're like the what is it? What's your position in Students and Youth for a New? This is the Vice President of Students and Youth for a New America. His name is Gavin Lockhart, and you are a Christian. And you disagree with me. You think that abortion, should be outlawed in line with your Christian beliefs. Is that fair? Yeah. Well, you're just as welcome in this organization, and I disagree with you, and you disagree with me, and you're welcome in this organization. But my understanding is that you're not welcome in the Democratic Socialists of America. That's right. And that you didn't even go to their meetings and argue with them about this. You were just going to their meetings, just as a regular person. You were going to their meetings, stay where you are, and you were going to their meetings and arguing with them about this, and not arguing with them about this issue, not debating them and all of that, just trying to support the Democratic Socialists of America. But they discovered on your Facebook that you take this position, and based on that, they drove you out of Democratic Socialists of America. Now, folks, this is proof that Democratic Socialists of America is not serious about bringing socialism to the United States. Because if they can't stand to have one guy who loves their group and is one of the most loyal and dedicated activists that you could find, they can't stand to have him in their group, how are they going to recruit anybody in the red states? I mean, there's a huge percentage of America that are opposed to abortion. And it shows they're not serious. They're just trying to be the foot soldiers of one wing of the ruling class to feed into the agenda that makes all Americans poorer. And they made a very stupid decision and cut themselves off from someone who's been very valuable, and we're really glad to have you in our organization. So glad to have you guys. So glad you're here. One of the things that the liberals don't seem to understand, and I tweeted out that though I'm pro-choice and in favor of gay marriage, that there are many people that are not for their own reasons, and they're still my comrades and I like them. And as I was being canceled, as it was being tweeted out 1,000 times, one thing that kept coming up, I kept seeing in the tweets, was, of course a white man would say that. And I thought, these people live under a rock. Go to, the big Palestine rallies that happen, and go walk through the Palestine rallies and poll the people that are marching for Palestine from Muslim communities in Minneapolis and Chicago and Bay Ridge, New York, and poll, the Muslim communities in Texas that are marching for Palestine. Ask them what they think about abortion. There was a young Muslim activist who spoke at our conference in Austin. He's from Texas, and you read his tweets. He is very opposed to abortion, and he is not a white man. He's of Pakistani heritage, and that's his feeling. And in the Puerto Rican community, there's a strong feeling that abortion is problematic because they have the trauma in their history of having their tubes forcibly tied in order to prevent them from breeding. And there are many black people and black nationalists who can recall efforts to wipe them out and have said that abortion is wrong because they feel that the white people have been trying to exterminate them for so long. And sure, I would say the majority of conservatives that are against abortion in the United States are white, but liberals don't speak for all people of color. They really don't, and they certainly don't speak for all women. A very high percentage of women are against abortion. And if we want to change the United States, we have to be able to relate to these folks. And we have to be able to say, look, we disagree with it. And I told you what I think about abortion, and I'm not afraid of it. And I'm not going to suppress and prevent anyone else from saying what they think about it who might have the contrary view. But we can't have this attitude that this is the cutting edge, this is the battle. Because if you reinforce this issue as being the dividing line, as being the battle, what you're doing is you're enabling the ruling class, both wings of it, to continue to carry out their agenda of austerity, of balkanizing the United States, and impoverishing people. And this is a nuanced position to take, and it's a tough position to take, but it's the position that we take. And it's because we take this position that we have brought people together in the Center for Political Innovation of different backgrounds, different perspectives, and we've talked to each other as people, and we've spent time together, and we've united around a socialist program. You will not find this in any other organization, and you won't find it, and there's something really, really special about what we're doing here. And I just want to make that point as a way of concluding this retreat, because I think we are at a pivotal moment. One thing that I laugh about, we had a gathering last year, it was in Saxton, and I called it the Saxton Lectures. And people are like, what, you trying to make it a historic event? Sure. Fake it till you make it, right? We should take ourselves seriously so that other people take us seriously, right? We should act, we should wear suits and ties like serious politicians because we aspire to be serious worker politicians. We should act as if we are going to be running the country in 4 or 5 years. It might take a little longer than that, but we should, if we don't take ourselves seriously, no one else will. Don't be afraid to talk about how historic it is, because honestly, folks, the way things are going, at the rate our membership is expanding over the last couple months, right now there's about 200 members of the Center for Political Innovation. We aim to do 1K by May, but at the rate things are going right now, I think there's a very good chance that in the history books of the United States, they're going to talk about how when the Roe v. Wade ruling came down and the synthetic left were stripping naked in their churches and bombing things and breaking things, a very important meeting happened in Linn Valley, Kansas. A very important meeting happened, and we were having a talent show and holding up pictures of John Brown, and we were talking about the future of the United States and hearing lectures about the World Land Bridge, and we were engaging with people of different perspectives, and I think people are going to remember this weekend. And I opened the retreat by talking about how this is a time of great transformation in the history of the country, but also it could be a time of great transformation in our lives. And I hope it was that for all of you. I hope that the relationships that are built here will last long and become stronger. Because ultimately, we need there to be weekends like this happening all across the country. At the rate we are growing, our goal at this point is to have weekends on a local level like this. You know, we have a local in Chicago. We have a local in the DC area. We have a local in California. And our hope is that by the end of the year, as new people are joining, we can have a weekend where new people are brought in and given the Saxton Lectures content as a way of inducting them into the group and leading discussions about that and kind of bringing them in. Because as I've repeated many, many times, we are in a race against time. We are in a race against time. We are trying to build the ship before the storm comes, because you can't build a ship in a storm. And when the storm comes, it will not matter how many dues-paying members we have. It will not matter how many likes and retweets we get on social media. All that will matter is the network we have built, the community that we have built that has the ability to mobilize people, to bring people together, to prop each other up, to support each other, and to face the storm that's coming. And when that storm comes, we can swing into action. And we can start providing the leadership that will really make a difference. That's what we are here to do at the Center for Political Innovation. And I feel like we have been very, very successful this weekend. I feel like this has been a weekend of great success. And I want to thank from the bottom of my heart Lily, the retreat coordinator. I want to thank Keaton and Elizabeth, who were here long before Lily and I got here, you know, doing the work to set this up and getting everything set up and all of that. I want to thank them for the work that they did, you know, driving people, etc. I want to thank our camera folks for recording all of this so that it does go down in the history books. And I want to thank everyone who did everything throughout the weekend. And one of the most beautiful things I saw this weekend is people stepping up. You know what I mean? When something needed to be done, you know, there were dishes that needed to be washed, somebody stepped up and did it. There was, you know, we needed to go pick somebody at the airport, someone said, I can do it. They stepped up. That's the right attitude to have, you know. There was a leader of the dock workers in San Francisco, the ILWU. His name was Harry Bridges. And Harry Bridges said, if it's 4 in the morning and there's 2 guys on the mimeograph machine, that's an old photocopying thing, the mimeograph machine, he had to crank it. If it's 4 in the morning and there's 2 guys on the mimeograph machine, one of them's a communist. You can bet on it. That's what he said. And that's the spirit that we need to have, right? We need to be the ones who mean it, the ones who do it, the ones who make sacrifices. And maybe we don't always get what we need, and maybe sometimes we get a little cranky and frustrated. Maybe we have to make our needs clear to somebody else. But we're supporting each other, we're building each other up, and we're building this community, because this community, this ship that we are building, is all that really matters at the end of the day. 1K by May, I think we can do it. I really do think we can do it. I'm very excited about everything we've achieved this weekend. Now, the Pledge of Unity is the statement that we've put together for the Center for Political Innovation. We open every Zoom call with it. We open the conference with it. And we want to start really pushing it. You know, if you have a local meeting, you ought to start with the Pledge of Unity, because the unity alludes to the danger of world war and the need of bringing people together of different perspectives. I mean, the Pledge of Unity, some of you may not know the origins of the Pledge of Unity. I'll just get into it real quick. After the Second World War, the Soviet Union started convening world festivals of youth and students. They formed the World Democratic Youth Federation and the International Federation of Students. And they gathered the World Democratic Youth Federation, the founding members of it in Czechoslovakia, and this was the pledge to join the World Democratic Youth Federation. And the communist parties of the world, their youth groups joined it, and the socialist groups, many anti-imperialist groups joined it. It was open to anyone who agreed with their principles of opposing imperialism, opposing fascism, and wanting to build a democratic world where working people were being lifted out of poverty. And so we took the pledge of the World Democratic Youth Federation, but we're a multi-age organization. There's many people of different ages in our group. So we replaced the word youth with people. And that is the pledge of the Center for Political Innovation. But it's important that when we say it in a group setting like this, on Zoom calls we just have to go through, but in a group setting like this, that we don't have the person just read it straight through. That they read a sentence, we all raise our right hands, they read a sentence, and then we repeat it back. And then they read the next sentence, and then we repeat it back. You know, so if Elizabeth, when you read it, you can do it that way. I think you can do it that way, and then we'll have some chanting and some applauding, and we'll end a really fiery way. And that is how our Linn Valley Training School, the great Linn Valley Training School, that's how it will come to an end. So, Elizabeth, go ahead. And I'm going to take a glass of water to get through this pledge.
All right.
Stand up, please. Oh, and you want to get a mic, so.
Yes.
No, hold on.
We pledge that we shall remember this unity.
We pledge that we shall remember this unity.
Forged at the end of the Second World War.
Forged at the end of the Second World War.
Not only today, not only this week.
Not only today, not only this week.
This year, but always.
This year, but always.
Until we have built the world.
Until we have built the world.
We have dreamed of and fought for.
We have dreamed of and fought for.
We pledge ourselves to build the unity.
We pledge ourselves to build the unity.
Of the people of the world.
Of the people of the world.
All races, all colors, all nationalities, all beliefs.
All races, all colors, all nationalities, all beliefs.
To eliminate all traces of fascism from the earth.
To eliminate all traces of fascism from the earth.
To build a deep and sincere international friendship.
To build a deep and sincere international friendship.
Among the peoples of the world.
Among the peoples of the world.
To keep a just, lasting peace.
To keep a just, lasting peace.
To eliminate want, frustration, and enforced idleness.
To eliminate want, frustration, and enforced idleness.
We have come to confirm the unity of all people.
We have come to confirm the unity of all people.
To salute our comrades who have died.
To salute our comrades who have died.
And pledge our word.
And pledge our word.
That skillful hands, keen brains, and bold enthusiasm.
That skillful hands, keen brains, and bold enthusiasm.
Shall never more be wasted in war.
Shall never more be wasted in war. CPI! 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 Dare to struggle!
Dare to win!
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 Out of the movement!
To the masses!
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 Free Assange!
Free Assange!
Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Slava Donbassu! 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 Dare to struggle!
Dare to win!
Dare to struggle!
Dare to win!
Dare to struggle!
Dare to win!
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.